We are joined now by Ivan Lidarev. Now, he's an Asian security expert at King's College London. Well, thanks for joining us this evening. First up, I want to talk about how an observer basically suggested that Prime Minister Modi will likely enter a phase to make India a strong regional power that's also a counterbalance to China. So what then, Ivan, is your opinion, what this means for the country's foreign policy with China and also with the West going forward?
Well, I don't think that there will be any fundamental change in India's foreign policy because very much India has pursued kind of a very active foreign policy of kind of getting closer with the West and kind of counterbalancing China for many years. So I don't think that there will be any fundamental change on this. I think also there is very strong consensus within India about this. However, of course, now Prime Minister Modi will be somewhat weakened domestically. And likely this will impose some constraints on his ability to have a more active foreign policy. When it comes down to the West, it's unlikely that there will be fundamental changes in India's relationship with the US, especially. When it comes to China, I think that probably the Indian government will be a bit more cautious in stabilizing relations with China because it might be a little bit kind of concerned about domestic criticism. So I think that this will kind of slow down a little bit the stabilization of China-India relations. And as we all know, they have not fully resolved their standoff at their contested border. But I don't think that there will be any fundamental change. I think that the process of stabilizing their relationship will continue.
In other words, Ivan, you don't think then that tensions between Delhi and Beijing will continue, whether it's border tensions or Chinese influence in South Asia, South China Sea, because there have been some skirmishes, with that regard, for instance?
Oh, I'm sure that there will be tensions, although not necessarily on the border. I think that the Chinese government has very much decided that it needs to stabilize the situation on the border. I think they are unhappy how border tensions escalated into a military confrontation back in 2020. So I think that they have decided that they need a better relationship with India, especially on the border. However, if you look at kind of China-India interactions, let's say in Bhutan or in the Indian Ocean, in the Maldives, I think that tensions will continue. And actually, I think that it's likely that there will be new venues for China to pressure India in the future in these areas. For example, there is new construction in contested areas which are kind of close to the border between Pakistan and China. Between Pakistan and China, and this is one area where there might be some tensions. But in general, I don't think that the border itself is going to keep on escalating unless India does something that very strongly provokes China, and China feels a need to respond to India in a decisive fashion.
Well, it's interesting you pointed out that, China is exploring some of these new venues. Do you think one of it perhaps could be using its influence in international organizations such as the BRICS grouping or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to perhaps limit or stunt India's growing influence?
Well, I think that definitely China will do its best to limit as much as it can India's influence on the global stage. I think, however, that China's ability to do so is relatively limited, simply put because they very often operate on different stages and have different partners. However, I think that China is likely to try to drag India to focus more on regional issues. So that's why I think that China will continue to focus on issues on the development of its relations with Sri Lanka, for example, Bhutan, Pakistan. All these are ways for China to pressure India and to refocus India from the larger international stage, from the Indo-Pacific to South Asia, and keep it kind of limited to South Asia. So I think that this will be one venue for China. Also, I think more broadly, China is going to compete much more actively with India as a leader of the global south. In the last 2 or 3 years, I think India has tried to position itself as a leader of the global south. And of course, China wants this position. So I think that this competition is going to increase. And I think that Beijing will do a lot to limit any Indian attempts to be seen as the natural leader of the third world. So I think that there is a lot of potential for competition there.
Yeah, Ivan, and following up with that point, Prime Minister Modi, he did announce plans to try and reform India's economy and rival Chinese manufacturing. I mean, how feasible are these plans?
Well, I think that there is definitely a lot of potential for growth, and I think that Indian manufacturing has been growing very substantially in recent years. However, I'm not sure that the goal of kind of India reaching 5% of world manufacturing by 2030 is very realistic at this stage. India has a lot of strengths, including its partnership with the US and with Japan. Obviously, India has a huge domestic market. But on the other hand, there is a lot of bureaucracy in India. It's not easy for foreign companies to operate. Also, India has to import a lot of inputs that go into manufacturing. So it won't be easy for India to compete with China. However, India also needs to compete not only with China, but also with other countries that are increasingly trying to attract business away, manufacturing business away from China. These include Southeast Asian countries and also Bangladesh, even some African countries. However, in general, I'm optimistic about India's manufacturing prospects. I think over time, India's huge domestic market, its partnership with key partners such as Japan and the US, and also series of economic reforms. For example, they're opening an investment zone in Gujarat. All these things, I think, over time will generate momentum for the development of Indian manufacturing. Also, I think it's very important to realize that India cannot do right now what China did 30 or 40 years ago, simply put, because the international market has very much changed. And it's very difficult to develop as a manufacturing hub, simply put, based on cheap labor. So I think that India has to focus much more on the quality of its workforce and much less on the quantity, especially when it comes to education, to training, these type of things. And I think that in some respects, especially English language ability and training, India has very big strengths. So I think that in some areas of manufacturing, it actually has a very bright future. But it won't be easy to kind of to replace China. Chinese way ahead. It has a very dominant position, so it won't be easy for India. No.
Oh, some really great insights there. I'm afraid that's all the time we have, though. Thanks so very much for speaking with us this evening, Ivan Lidarev, Asian security expert at King's College London.